It was an ordinary morning in the Harper household. The sunlight crept through the lace curtains, casting delicate shadows on the walls of their small, aging house nestled on the outskirts of Applewood, Michigan. The years had taken their toll on the house, just as they had on the Harper family. Inside, 6-year-old Emily Harper sat on the worn-out couch, her small hands clutching a sketchbook, the edges of the pages curled from overuse. It's a story of survival, self-discovery, and the unexpected reunion that changed my life forever. Watch as I walk you through the pain, challenges, and eventual healing that led to this moment of reconciliation. Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more personal journeys and inspiring content. Her little world was full of crayons, the scent of breakfast, and the quiet hum of her family going about their daily routines. "Emily, are you listening?" her mother, Carol, called out from the kitchen, her voice sharp but laced with concern. Carol, with her brow furrowed and apron stained with oil, turned her attention to the dishes piling up in the sink. "Yes, Mama," Emily murmured, tucking her drawing into the drawer. Her brown hair, loosely braided, hung in messy strands around her face. She wore a faded blue dress that didn't quite fit her properly, a constant reminder that Emily was always the afterthought in a home where her younger brother, Danny, was the center of attention. "Wash the dishes and tidy up Danny's toys before he wakes up," Carol ordered, her tone more tired than harsh. Emily nodded quietly, knowing there was no point in arguing. It was her place to help, her place to be the quiet one. But even at 6, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As Emily worked in the kitchen, her little brother, Danny, rushed out of his room. He was full of energy, a stark contrast to Emily's quiet demeanor. Their father, Thomas, had just come home from his struggling auto repair shop, the weight of the recession heavy on his shoulders. Danny rushed to him, his eyes bright with excitement as he received a new toy car from Thomas. Emily watched silently from the kitchen, her heart sinking. The toys, the attention, the smiles, everything Danny received felt like it belonged to someone else. Her parents barely noticed her as she worked quietly in the background. She had long ago learned not to ask for anything, not to expect anything. But there was a growing ache inside her, one she couldn't quite understand. "Emily, are you done yet?" Carol called out again, snapping Emily out of her thoughts. Emily wiped the last of the dishes and looked up at her mother. Her shoulders were heavy with the weight of unspoken words. As the evening wore on, Emily overheard a conversation between her parents in the next room. The words were unclear, but the tone was unmistakable. "We can't afford to keep doing this. What if we?" Emily's heart beat faster. She knew they were talking about her. She could feel it in the air, a tension that had never been there before. Just days later, something unexpected happened. Carol called Emily into the kitchen, her voice warmer than usual. "We're going hiking this weekend," Carol said, her smile strangely kind. "It's going to be a special trip, just the family." Emily's heart leaped. A family trip, something for her. For once, she was the focus. Carol handed her a small bag containing a brand new pair of hiking shoes. Emily's eyes widened. "For me," she whispered, barely able to believe it. She hadn't gotten anything new in years. That night, Emily slept with the shoes beside her, her small body filled with hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were changing. Little did she know, this hiking trip would be the beginning of the most painful chapter of her life. The morning of the hike arrived, and Emily could barely contain her excitement. The old station wagon rolled along the winding roads leading toward the Blue Ridge Mountains. Emily gazed out the window, watching the scenery pass by as the car hummed softly. Thomas, with his usual grin, winked at her through the rearview mirror. "This is a special place, Emily. A secret spot," he said, his voice filled with an enthusiasm Emily hadn't heard in a long time. For a moment, everything felt right. The sun was bright, the music was soft, and the family was together. The hike would be something memorable, something to treasure. But even as Emily clutched her new shoes, a dark thought lingered in the back of her mind. The conversation she had overheard the night before gnawed at her. They arrived at the trailhead, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Emily felt like she was part of something. Carol, usually distant, suggested a photo to commemorate the moment. She placed the camera on a tree stump and set the timer, instructing Emily to stand beside Danny. Finally, they reached a clearing, and Emily found herself standing alone in the middle of a strange silence. She looked around at the towering trees and the rustling leaves, the air heavy with something she couldn't place. "This is goodbye," Carol's voice came out cold and detached. "Goodbye," Emily repeated, her voice breaking. She looked at her parents in confusion. What did they mean? Carol's face twisted into a smile, but it wasn't the smile of someone who cared. "You need to survive on your own now," she said calmly. "We can't afford to keep you." Emily's world shattered in that moment. Her mind refused to comprehend her father's words. How could they do this? She was their daughter. She was their family. Yet, in that instant, she realized she wasn't. Emily stumbled through the woods that day, the words of her parents echoing in her mind. How could they? How could they abandon her like that? The little girl who had once believed in the warmth of family, in the love of her parents, was now lost. Alone. But in that loneliness, Emily found something she had never known before. Herself. She wandered the woods for hours, the darkness creeping in around her. Yet with every step she took, she grew stronger. She realized that even though her parents had rejected her, she was capable of surviving on her own. Days passed, and Emily was eventually found by a hiker who took her to safety. But the journey didn't end there. She was placed in foster care and grew into a strong, independent woman. She worked hard, found her way, and built a life for herself. 15 years later, the unthinkable happened. Her biological parents, the ones who had abandoned her, walked into her office. "She's our only daughter," they said. "Our pride." The words stung, but Emily held her head high. She had built her life, her identity, without them. She had learned to survive, to thrive, without their love. "Why did you leave me?" she asked quietly, her voice steady despite the years of hurt. Her parents faltered, guilt flashing across their faces, but Emily wasn't angry anymore. She had found strength in her solitude, and she knew that her worth wasn't defined by their rejection. The world would try to define you by your past, by what others think of you, by what others have done to you. But the truth is, your strength, your worth, and your future lie in your own hands. The power to rise above is within you. Never let anyone make you feel less than you are. You are enough. The wind picked up, whispering secrets through the towering trees. The air felt thick with tension. But Erin, still bewildered and lost in a haze of confusion, tried to shake it off. Her parents' words echoed in her mind, sharp and cold. "You need to survive on your own now." She stood there, trembling, staring at them as they clutched Daniel in their arms, the boy too innocent to understand what was unfolding. Her eyes wandered from their faces to the ground, where the leaves swirled in a dance of melancholy, as though nature itself was mourning the heartless abandonment of a child. Erin blinked, her mind racing, her heart pounding as she tried to make sense of it. She had overheard them last night. Yes, but surely this wasn't real. This couldn't be real. She had always been just a little different, a little left behind in their world. But this was something she wasn't prepared for. Why? The question floated in her mind like a lifeboat lost at sea. Why was Daniel enough for them? Why was she not? Her breath hitched as she looked to her parents. The sun now cast long shadows, painting their faces in an eerie, distorted light. Thomas's eyes were distant, his expression void of any emotion, as if the decision had been made long ago. Carol, too, was eerily calm, as though this was some form of tragic necessity. Erin's voice, small and desperate, cracked through the silence. "Why? What did I do wrong?" Thomas didn't even flinch, his gaze unwavering. "Nothing," he muttered, but his voice lacked the warmth, the comfort a child so desperately needed. "But you're a burden, Aaron. You always have been. We just can't keep carrying you. You're not the one." Carol reached out, placing Daniel down as she stepped toward Aaron. Her eyes glistened with something. Regret, perhaps. But Aaron couldn't be sure. "Sweetheart," Carol began, her tone, for the first time, full of something approaching pity. "This is the best thing for you. You'll be stronger on your own. You'll find a way. You'll be okay." But the words felt hollow. They were empty promises, like a band-aid on a gaping wound. How could anyone think she would be okay? How could they leave her behind in a strange wilderness, with no one but the towering trees as company? "Aaron, honey," Carol said with a cold edge creeping back into her voice, "we'll be fine. You'll be fine. It's time to let go." The finality in her words sent a chill down Aaron's spine. She looked around, searching for something, anything, that would explain the sudden cruelty of the moment. But there was nothing. The forest had fallen silent. Even the birds, once chirping merrily, now seemed to be holding their breath. She turned on her heel, stumbling through the thick underbrush. The brush scraped at her bare arms, the sting a sharp reminder that she was alone, truly alone, in a world that never cared to see her. As the distance between her and her parents grew, she felt her chest tighten, the weight of abandonment crushing her heart. She wanted to scream, to beg them to take it back, to say it was a mistake, that they didn't mean it, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she was left with a silence so deafening that it echoed in her bones. Her feet carried her farther and farther, past twisted roots and jagged rocks. With each step, the forest seemed to close in around her. Yet the more she walked, the more she felt a strange resolve building inside her, a spark, flickering, but growing brighter. The wild, the unknown, perhaps it was not so terrifying after all. This moment, this pain, might define her, but it would not destroy her. She wiped the tears from her cheeks, as stubbornly as the wind wiped away the whispers of her past. She would survive. She would make it out of this forest, out of the darkness, and find a way to be more than they thought she could be. She had to. There was no other choice. Aaron pushed forward, one step at a time, no longer the helpless child abandoned in the woods, but a girl with fire in her heart and a future waiting to be shaped by her hands. This, she realized, was the beginning of her journey, and no one could take that from her. As the shadows grew longer and the forest deepened into the unknown, Aaron's legs burned with every step. She had no clear destination in mind, just a raw, unrelenting urge to escape, to run. But with each stride, something within her shifted. It wasn't the fear of being alone anymore. It was the fire that had ignited within her, sparking something she never knew she had. The world around her seemed to bend, to shift, as if it, too, was waiting for her to discover something greater than what she had left behind. She paused for a moment, her breath coming in quick, uneven gasps. The forest, though wild and untamed, had become a mirror of her inner turmoil. The wind howled through the trees, and a distant howl echoed through the hills, a reminder that she was not alone in this vast wilderness. There were creatures here, hidden, lurking, but they too were fighting for survival, just like her. And in that moment, standing beneath the canopy of ancient trees that had witnessed generations rise and fall, Aaron realized something monumental. Survival wasn't about running from the darkness. It was about confronting it head-on. It was about facing the pain, the rejection, the uncertainty, and using it as fuel to carve out a new path. Her parents had abandoned her. They had sent her into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back and the remnants of a broken heart. But they had underestimated one thing. Aaron was not defined by their abandonment. She was not a victim of her circumstances. She was the creator of her destiny. She tightened her grip on the small satchel she had grabbed in the chaos of her departure, her knuckles whitening as she clenched it with newfound strength. The bag was small, insignificant even, But it represented more than just a survival kit. It was a symbol of her resilience, of her ability to adapt and overcome. In the face of adversity, she would not break. She would bend, but she would not break. A rustling in the underbrush snapped her from her thoughts. Her heart raced as she instinctively crouched low, listening. Her breath caught in her throat as a shape emerged from the dense foliage. A wolf, its fur a silvery gray that seemed to blend seamlessly with the mist rising from the forest floor. Its eyes locked onto hers, gleaming with a wild intelligence, and for a moment, Erin held her breath. This creature, this predator, could easily be her end. But instead of fear, something else welled up within her, a sense of connection. This was the wilderness, unforgiving and harsh, yet undeniably beautiful in its rawness. Just like her. The wolf tilted its head, studying her for a long, silent moment. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it melted back into the forest, disappearing without a trace. Erin's heart hammered in her chest, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something else, something deep within her stirring to life. She stood up, taking a steadying breath, and with renewed purpose, continued on her path. Every step was a declaration, every breath a challenge to the world that had tried to break her. The darkness was no longer her enemy. It was her fuel. The forest stretched on, but Erin wasn't afraid. She knew, deep in her soul, that this was her moment. This was where her story would be written. Not in the shadows of abandonment, but in the light of her own perseverance. As she moved deeper into the wild, the wind seemed to whisper something to her. An ancient secret carried through the ages. You are stronger than you know. You are not a victim. You are a force to be reckoned with. And so, the journey continued, not just through the wilderness, but through the very depths of her own soul. She had been left for dead, discarded like an old, forgotten thing, but the world had misjudged her. She was not broken. She was not lost. She was a survivor, a warrior. And every warrior knows that their greatest strength lies not in avoiding the battle, but in embracing it. Erin's journey was far from over. But now, for the first time, she knew that she could face whatever came next. And whatever came next, she would face it with the unshakable certainty that no one, not even the world that had abandoned her, could ever define her again. Her story was just beginning. And this time, it would be her story, written by her own hand. The world had underestimated her, but now, as she looked toward the horizon, she understood one thing. No one could ever abandon her again, for she was the master of her fate. The question was no longer whether she would survive, but how she would rise. And rise she would.